Okay, everybody's very welcome. Fall to Maynooth, you're all very welcome to Maynooth. This is part of a seminar series that we host for MUSSI in partnership with the Research Development Office, who are very well represented today. And it's myself, Seán Ó Foghlú, my colleague, we will see online Professor Mark Boyle and my other colleague, Dr. John O'Connor, and we organised this series between ourselves, would really just try and look at different aspects of researchers and policymakers working together. And we're really thrilled that we have Professor Aoife McLysaght with us here today, really for an informal conversation and just to really get an understanding of where Aoife is coming from and maybe where you're going.
Yeah.
So on both sides. So we're thrilled. So everybody knows that you're here, obviously, but Aoife is the government science advisor. So obviously doing other things as well. But we're going to talk through those things as well. So first of all, very well.
Thank you so much.
People may have, if you're keen listeners to RT1, we're competing with Miriam O'Callaghan. We did about 15 minutes with Aoife, which was really, really interesting and really, really good. And I was saying to Aoife beforehand, I learned an awful lot from that about her. So, and I think that would be, some of it would be useful just to talk about for a second. It's really like, what even brought you like into studying science?
Yeah, I mean, so I think my story is not so unusual, but I liked science in school a lot, and I had a really, really great teacher. I think I was very lucky. A lot of people have those stories. I think, teachers are very important. A lot of people, teachers either light that fire or actually put you off something if it goes wrong. But so I prefer the positive story. But I had a really fabulous teacher who was very committed to science education. And I think the way he did it, so he happened to be a PhD, which was unusual for a school teacher as well. And the way he did things, I think, emulated in a lot of ways the scientific process of discovery. Because I distinctly remember in those lectures when we eventually did, classes actually, not lectures, but when we eventually did, started doing genetics and evolution, he spent a lot of time on it, was one thing. Whereas I know in other schools I'd hear the teacher was skipping through, but he kind of left little nuggets of information around that weren't strictly part of the course, but you might start noticing patterns. And that is very much what you need to do if you're doing research, start noticing things that you didn't know were there. And the example that I really clearly remember was he was telling us about the basics of genetics, and that DNA, you have these 4 letters, A, C, T, G, and genes and things like this. And whenever he was so it was all overhead projector, writing as you go. And whenever he was saying, then there's a gene, he would just write ATG and a squiggle. And he never said anything about the fact that it was those letters, ATG, but every time he did ATG and then a squiggle. And then I was like, all the genes, every time he draws a gene, it begins with ATG, and I wonder what that is. And this was well-established knowledge. It wasn't like I was discovering anything, but I had that little bit of noticing something, and it turns out ATG is a very special sequence of letters in DNA because it's what's called the start codon, and it is the start of every gene. And he could have just done a squiggle, or he could have just done anything, but he did ATG without pointing it out or signaling anything. And so I got to have that little kind of micro thrill of I figured something out, and that is a lot of what it is to be doing research as well. So I think he was quite a special teacher in that way. And so, so I really enjoyed science in school. I enjoyed other things as well. I still remember like in my CAO form, I was putting down other things, but science was definitely my top choice. And I just went into it not knowing where that would lead.
Did you go into general science?
Yes.
Specific?
Yeah, so at that time in Trinity anyway, it was all general science. So now we have it's like even biological, physical, chemical, and earth sciences. But at that time, it was just natural sciences. So you went in and you were just in a big pot with everybody else, and you figured it out when you were there, which was a nice thing in a certain way. Although I think I already knew I wanted to go the biology kind of path. Yeah.
And so then what took you from studying undergrad science into really making yourself a career?
Yeah.
There must have been a number of jumps.
Yeah, I mean, I do distinctly remember as well in school, there were kind of, the brainy ones. And some of them were talking about doing a PhD. And I was like, they're never going to leave college. They're going to be there forever. And that ended up being me. But I didn't have that idea at all. But I did a couple of summer jobs when I was a student. And they ended up being kind of lab and science, the researchy kind of ones. And I really liked it. And then we all have this experience of doing the final year project as well. And I really enjoyed that. And it was the supervisor I had from that started talking to me about PhDs, and it went that way. And then I realized this is something I just really enjoyed. And I did it in a very, I kind of accepted that I didn't know where it was going. That was it, basically. I didn't know what doing a PhD was going to lead to. I didn't know any of those things, and I just decided to accept that and do what I felt like doing for now and trust that the rest would work out, which is very optimistic. I'm glad I had that optimism.
You had the interest in science and obviously into genetics and all that aspect. What impact did you want that to have? Where did you start thinking, going beyond interest and into making a difference?
I think actually a lot of it is still just based on curiosity, to be totally honest with you. So like I get curious about things and I try to figure out bits about them rather than thinking about the impact first. I know other people do it different ways, but I start off with a position of I just wonder how this works. I wonder what that is, and and the impact part comes later for me. And I mean we do see it in that sense of. So my work is evolutionary genetics, my research work. So we're looking at genomes, trying to understand events in the past. And what we're doing now is actually trying to understand how in the past animals survived periods of mass extinction, which is often, dramatic climate change or change in conditions anyway, these periods of mass extinction. And so we didn't approach this whole area trying to understand that, like with the motivation of modern day climate change, but it clearly has that relevance. But it was really that we were studying an aspect of evolutionary genetics, that we were studying it out of initially pure curiosity. And then people started noticing these events in the past are clustered in time. They're in all of these different independent branches of life, even in plants and everything, but they're clustered in time, so they're happening independently, but around this same period. And it maps really well onto periods of change in the environment, and mass extinctions. But you can see, like in the fossil record, you can track this and compare it with things like changes in composition of the atmosphere and light and all of these kind of things. So it kind of came about by accident, and it does happen that way sometimes. And I think it's worth remembering that sometimes research leads you where you don't anticipate. Because I do know, like in terms of strategy for research and research funding, I strongly believe you need a balance of both, in terms of the ones that have maybe more clear pathways to an impact, which might be more on the shorter to medium term. And then you have the things which appear to be just pure curiosity-driven, discovery-based research, but they do lead places. I mean, there's one example that I like, which is one of the most important discoveries that was made in terms of human immunology was by a man who was researching grasshoppers, and he was just really curious about these grasshoppers, and he found this really important protein in the grasshoppers, which has an exact equivalent in human immune system. And it was not the intention to make this important discovery. It was not the original motivation. And I think, and it probably needed somebody to look at a simple system like grasshoppers, because the human system is so complex that sometimes trying to break down the little parts is really difficult. But in something like grasshoppers, it was possible.
Yeah, all been hearing about stuff being found in frogs.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yes. Well, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I suppose you've got this huge curiosity. You're driven by curiosity. So as your career moved on and you saw, maybe from what you're saying, you saw, yeah, this actually is really interesting to have a potential impact. So what pulled you towards then this I'm not quite saying the motivation for the science advisor role yet, but what pulled you towards the interest in that engagement with wider society and impact on policy?
So I suppose I have a strong belief that, science matters, that data matters, that, all of these things, good decision making and all of that. And also, and on the other kind of side of that same thing, that science research and all of this is actually a really important part of human culture as well. So I think we're all very familiar with the idea that, culture is music and the arts and theatre. And I think everybody is comfortable and familiar with the idea that you can enjoy those things without being a practitioner. You can really enjoy music. Music can be something very important in your life without being able to play an instrument or sing a song. Same with, theatre and cinema and all of that. And I think science belongs in that space too, that it is part of human culture that people can enjoy without having to be a practitioner. And I think there's too much the sense that science is for people who do science in universities and it's not something for the broader public. And so I enjoy sharing stuff about science. A lot of it is very nerdy in that, I just think it's cool and I kind of think other people will think it's cool too. So, that kind of nerdiness underneath it all. But I see it as a part of human culture and something that ought to be shared. But then also, in various ways over the last decades, we've seen kind of resistance to science in various things. So there's vaccine hesitancy. We know about that. There's, questioning of the truthfulness of climate change and that it's human driven and all of these kind of things. And I think an important part of dealing with those specific cases is also the general aspect of showing how science works and what the process is, and that science isn't just somewhere, in a lab or in a small room, and that isn't observed or noticed by the public at large. So I have I suppose, a very strong interest that people understand what science is and that understand, when we say we know something, this is why we say we know it. And when we're having discussions about bits that, like disagreements among scientists in research, is it this or is it that? We're talking about some of the finer details, but not the core concept. And, so there's space, like that can be confusing, I think, in terms of the general public. They're saying, oh, all the scientists don't agree. It's like, no, we don't, because we don't agree on these kind of final details, and we're trying to refine things. And there's a friend of mine who described it as being less wrong than yesterday. That's just the constant, progress of research. You rarely stop and go, we know everything now. That's fine. It's all done. I need to pick up a hobby. It's instead, it's like you're constantly moving, towards things being more correct. Sometimes those end up being big discoveries that are big steps. Other times it's smaller stuff. But I do care about science being understood and appreciated. And then, evolution is one that is also doubted in some circles. So I suppose I came across it relatively early, the thing of debating, whether evolution is true. But then, vaccine hesitancy, climate change, all of these things. I think it's important that people understand how science works as part of the insulation against the misinformation.
Prior to going for the science advisor role, did you involve yourself in networks beyond your field that were looking at these sorts of issues there?
So I was very involved in a lot of science communications in general. So I got the connections I ended up making were people who were more, I suppose, in the broadcasting space, and some academic scientists who'd be getting involved in that. But I did quite a few things there. And Science Gallery in Trinity was a huge part of that. That's where it started for me, because I think prior to that, I did have this quite narrow idea of what it meant to do science communication. And, I could just picture the professor who ends up on the news that day to talk about, this is what this means, and this very narrow, so you're being interviewed by, the newsreader in the studio. And I kind of thought, oh yeah, that's good, somebody does it, but it didn't really engage me. And then I suppose Science Gallery showed me it could actually be loads of fun as well for everybody, so fun for me to do and fun for people to listen to and participate in and make things sometimes into games. Like, so it was, I celebrate Darwin Day every year, which is Darwin's birthday, 12th of February, much better than Valentine's Day. And so last week was this. But so we did a birthday party because we're for Darwin, and we decided to model it on a child's birthday party. So we had a big cake for Darwin. We had a best beard competition because Darwin had a beard, and we had and we did a game of musical chairs, which was actually a simulation of natural selection, right? Because it's competition for limited resources.
Do this at the Science Centre?
Yes. And it was very funny because it was really fun because people took it very seriously. It turns out that all these people who haven't played musical chairs since they were 8 years old were really waiting for their chance to play musical chairs again. It was very, very competitive. And when we ended up, with the one chair and two people, each of them got a bum cheek on and nobody was budging. But it was, it was a fun game, but it is the same thing. It's competition for limited resources. There's 8 people, there's 7 chairs. You don't have to be the fastest person in the world. You don't have to be somebody who's capable of winning an Olympic medal. You just have to get to the seat before the person who's beside you, which is the way it works in evolution as well. And then I ended up using this in my lectures because I thought that's kind of a fun way. I couldn't do the whole musical chairs in the lecture theatre, but I was just telling the story of musical chairs as a metaphor for what happens in natural selection. So we had fun with that. Sorry, I think I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah, I did lots of, yeah. But then I also ended up doing various bits with BBC, lots of radio. And I suppose the biggest thing then was when I did the Christmas lectures, the BBC Christmas lectures, which was a huge amount of fun. And it was great to have the resources as well there of the people who were like the kind of production team, but also we had this wonderful, amazing woman who's an engineer by training, and she was building stuff for us because we wanted to demonstrate things. And so we would imagine stuff and she would build it. I think she must have been cursing me a few times, but that was great. And the theme of those lectures was who am I? And we started out, there were 3 lectures, and the first one was, well, you're an animal like other animals. And then the second one was kind of you're human, and the third one was you're you. So, it was like the kind of various stages of that individuality, and it was fun. And
so Chief Science Advisor concept being talked about, being advertised without being precise. What made you think, oh yeah, maybe I could consider trying this out?
So I hadn't been thinking about it at all, and it wasn't something on my radar. And then I suppose the department must have engaged a recruitment company, and I was contacted by them. They contacted many people, I'm sure. And so that was the first I thought about it. So then, so when it was presented to me like that, this is something that's happening, I started to think about it. I started talking to people, and I was interested and curious because I like the idea of that, science could be used well for the public good. I was interested in that. I was also interested in doing something, I suppose, slightly different. For me, it was also interesting that's a little bit of a change. And the thing I was worried about, concerned about, was in case the role might be kind of a window dressing. What I didn't want. I didn't want it to be some kind of tick box. So, we said we'd get a science advisor. We got one, check. Now that's done. We don't need to pay attention over there anymore. And so that was something very much I was probing as I was thinking about applying. What do people want and expect from this? And my experience since I've started as well has been that, everybody, so I'm based in De Ferris, as you know, and everybody there really wants the role to be a success. So that's really important to me as well, to have that support from them, that they want this to work. We want it to have legs and to go through. So
in a way, the science advisor role was a reboot, a rethink. So the department itself is, well, it's not new anymore, but it was new. It's a new concept of, especially to bring in research together. Was a big coming together for the first time in a single department leading it. And then there had been science advice in the past, but the office had been completely independent, but then it was subsumed into the chief executive of SFI. And then there was a bit of a break and a rethink. And in the job spec, it was really left to the person who took up the job to shape the job. So you might talk us through some of that.
And so some things were laid out, and the rest is really up to me, which I actually think is a huge privilege. That I'm able to decide how do I do this. And so what I've been doing is talking a lot to international counterparts. So like you say, the role previously, I think it kind of existed kind of in the ether, in the sense it didn't have a place in the Irish civil service, and people are used to interacting in certain ways. And it was advice, I think, definitely. So one of the people I spoke to was John Aston, who had been Chief Scientific Advisor in the UK Home Office, and he's now some Vice President for Research or Innovation or something in Cambridge University. But he and I talked a lot, and he seemed to have been at least one of the people they spoke to in terms of how to structure it. And having the role inside a department just means you're at least part of the structures of how things work. But
Which is more just inside your member of the management board.
Yes.
That's a key part of the
and that's very interesting as well. I see how a lot of things work. But so in terms of how to structure things and how to shape things, I've been talking to people internationally, and that's been really, really good. And people have been really generous with their time and their expertise. So I spoke with John. He was really, really good. Another one was Peter Gluckman, who was the first Chief Scientific Advisor to the New Zealand Prime Minister. And so I thought he had probably experienced a similar situation. So I'm not the first, but it had been so dramatically restructured that it was similar to being the first, in that I wasn't inheriting structures and things like that. And I suppose New Zealand, similar style of government, similar dimensions of country and things like this. And he is no longer in that role, but since leaving that role, he's been really involved in international structures for science advice. So there's international associations of science advisors, and he's the president of that and all of this. So I got introduced with him, and he was very open to talking to me. So we've talked several times, and so we have Zoom calls where it's early morning for me and evening for him with all the time zone difference. And he's been really helpful, and just talking about how he approached things, how he does things. Everybody has told me that I've talked to has told me that so much of it is based on relationships. That it's so I'm a lot of what I've been doing then is getting to meet people and building those relationships, and how it's so important to have relationships where people then can trust you, trust that you're giving good advice, but also that we all have similar motivations, I suppose, as well, part of that. And so, for example, with Peter, he's been very helpful. So I had a meeting in the Department of Justice, and so my background is evolutionary genetics, so I didn't have good insight for how science could be useful in the Department of Justice without talking to other people first. And then I talked to Peter, and he introduced me to their Chief Scientific Advisor in their Ministry of Justice, and we had a long call with him, and he was talking and telling me all the various things he's doing. I've met people who are in the Departments of Education in New Zealand, and then in the UK as well. They have a system with science advisors in every department, as well as the overall Chief Scientific Advisor to the government. And so these people, we talk to them a lot. And so, in terms of figuring out how to structure it, a lot of it is this getting to know people, talking to people, building up trust, which is, in a sense, it's a harder one to. It's not that it's harder to do, but it's harder to demonstrate you've achieved it. So and so that is so when if I get called up for demonstrate you've achieved X, Y, Z, that's harder, because when a lot of it is that kind of informal, organic thing. Another thing that Peter Gluckman said to me is he said he thought sometimes his most important achievement various times was recommending something not be done. So then that, of course, is kind of invisible as well in the structures. But then, so there's that part, and then there's the Science Advice Forum, which was in the original memo of government. And so the membership of that is going to be announced very soon. I thought it would have been announced a couple of weeks ago, but there's just scheduling of things. But and we got really lucky. We had a huge number of applications for that, which I was really gratified with that. Like we had like 97 or 98 applications for a 12-person forum. And I think and hope part of that came from the fact that I spent some time talking to various people beforehand and kind of saying, look, this is what we want to do. I would like this to really be a useful forum. I want it to work well. And then we have also within the civil services, the Civil Service Research Network, and I saw Leonora just came in, she's in charge of that. But so which is across the civil servants, and I'm trying to then look at that and how can I leverage that more for linking in with the academic research, because I am convinced there's plenty of people, like I know there's plenty of people doing really good research, and I'm convinced that they would be happy if that could actually be implemented in, like sooner rather than later, so making those links between the civil service and the people who are doing the research stronger is something that I really want to do as well.
There's a huge amount of what you just said. So I think everybody here is really, really interested in all of this and online indeed. And so I was going to just go to your international networks first.
Yeah.
I'll pick that a bit. So there's a network we're very familiar with as well, kind of within the European Union, or maybe European Union and a little bit beyond. And you're actually a member of the board, aren't you, of the Joint Research Centre?
Yes, yeah.
So have you found much in common with the EU counterparts, or is...
So yes and no. I mean, so the structures are different in different places. So how you actually do things can be different. But just I think a lot of us encounter similar challenges. So there was also that seminar that you organized in MUSSI, in November. I was trying to remember, and the guy you had from Denmark, was it Peterson? Am I getting his name right? Yeah, David Peterson. And so a lot of what he said rang quite true for me when talking about, so it wasn't that there was nothing there, but it was that it was quite fragmented. And a lot of people say that. So it's not, I don't think any of us is dealing with a situation where no science is being incorporated into decision making, but that it could be joined up better. And I think that is a very interesting challenge, trying to make things, having these different bits of science, different bits like policymakers and all these people being just a bit more aware of what other people are doing, being able to learn off each other better, and then this interaction with with academia. So when like in the various meetings I've had, I've met people who've been very engaged. So I've met various university researchers who are very engaged with policymakers, practically having each other on speed dial, but then other people don't know about that. And so, this becomes this little pairing. So this little, they talk to each other a lot, but other people don't know about that. And so they don't know that this person here actually really is very knowledgeable and aware of how things fit in the context of the political system. And so they don't know that she's a good person to talk to for these. So I think, there's all of these pockets that are really brilliant and working well. And I'd see part of the role is joining them up. But sorry, the international comparison is similar. Like people say the same thing.
And so and then you've got your advisory group.
Yes.
And you're obviously about to announce that. And again, just like you, I assume it's not that, I mean, they will all be experts, but you'll all have to get other people involved together. It's all about choosing, if there's an area, them knowing the area, but then talking more to other people.
Yes, yeah.
Rather than just making them the expert, is that right?
Yeah. And the same as like I said about myself, even, if there was a question that was on genetics, I would probably be going to other people as well, even if I'm in a genetics department in the university. So we all need to bring in expertise. But the idea with some of these people on the panel is then that they will know who to call on, whereas I mightn't know who to call on, or at least they'll know it faster. They'll either know the thing themselves, or they'll know these are the key people. These are the ones we need to be talking to for this kind of question. And part of how I see that forum working as well is interacting, or at least responding and reacting a bit to what's happening internationally too. So there are these various papers that are produced on science advice. So there's the science advice mechanism, which you'll have heard of, and there are these organizations that are essentially commissioning a few big reports, papers a year on various topics. Sometimes it's solar panels, other times it's water quality. It's all of these kind of things. And they are done in this big, broad European context usually. And one thing that I would like with the forum is that we are, responding to those and putting the Irish context on them as well. So, they might say something about solar panels. How much of that is applicable in Ireland? What can we directly take? What would we take slightly modified? And so, not duplicating that effort, which would be a waste of resources, but benefiting from these big international structures as well, and then contextualizing them for Ireland. And that would be one thing that I'd like to do. And and sorry, I think I've just kept talking and didn't let you ask any questions.
That's what we want. Yeah, but so you've also more recently taken on responsibility for the broader evidence for policy.
Yes.
Civil Service Research Network. And you talked about the experts within, say, higher education, and we've been trying to sort of demonstrate that in the seminar series and in some of our other work, that it can often be that there are some really good, you've described them as pockets, but groups of people working together or individuals, but there's very little knowledge kind of across, say, even within the university across the board, and then you have pockets reinventing the wheel, if you like. So have you any ideas or emerging ideas about how to
connect those? Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And like one of the examples of somebody that I discovered was very active was actually in my own university, and I was unaware of this, so I was unaware of the work they were doing with government.
To clarify, you're still in, so into your
yes, it's 40-60, yeah. So 2 days in university, 3 days in government. So I have a few ideas for that, and I expect that it might be a bit of trial and error. But one of the ideas is around kind of organizing essentially themed workshop type days, or if there's a word that would be more attractive, I don't know, but to bring together people on themes, so that we could have various academic researchers meeting civil servants and kind of talking about common ideas, shared problems, and different approaches like that. And so that would get people more aware of each other across academia and then within the civil service. My instinct is that these things have to happen a bit organically, that it doesn't really do any good for me to go here, Seán, meet Mark, you two work together now. I think it'd go well. It has to happen.
It takes a whole year
to even didn't acknowledge each other in the corridor. But so I think getting people together into the same space, that they start having conversations, and that's how it worked also for me in terms of scientific collaborations. That I've had collaborations with people, but usually the collaboration doesn't emerge the first time you meet somebody. You meet and you realize you're interested in what they do, they're interested in what you do, but you don't immediately see how they can work together, and it's some other time that you make that linkage. So I wouldn't be thinking about any kind of forced collaborations.
Because talking about myself and Professor Mark Boyle, when I was seconded in here, I was going around talking, I met about 100 people, just trying to get my head around the ideas. And I met Mark. Nobody actually said you need to meet Mark. And Mark had been doing something. He'd headed up the Heseltine Institute in Liverpool, which was doing this connecting between the University of Liverpool and the Liverpool regional area. But when we did meet after a few months, we then found we were, if you like, fellow travelers. And it added hugely to what I was doing to have an academic partner in that, And then I, similarly with Mark, somebody from policymaking background. So actually, an unforced collaboration was really, really helpful for us.
And I think it's the way people prefer to work, isn't it? It's you like to because part of it is, it's not only your mutual interests, but it's how you work together as well. It's that whole thing of.
But equally then as well as breaking, I suppose, making within universities everything more coherent and aware of practices and connect, and then we come to the connecting the two. But we've also got the impenetrableness or impenetrability of government departments and agencies.
Yeah.
Where even if they do have very strong research leads and research coherence, as is emerging more and more with the civil service research network, getting behind that.
Yeah.
It's like winning over the policy leads in all the areas.
Yes, yeah.
Quite hard, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think, and I mean, I understand a lot of it in that people are busy, so, and they're, it's not like they're sitting around waiting for somebody to come along and how to change all their work practices. They're busy and they're working hard and they're doing all kinds of things. So if somebody comes along and a suggestion to do things differently mightn't be so welcome. I also found, I have to say from personal experience, that it's just sometimes hard to, like, I found it, one of the challenges was discovering what's already there. And this is, I know, Mark, you're doing a lot of mapping of what's there, but so there were various times, when I'm thinking about things, and I was like, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that, and then discover, oh, there's a committee for this already, and I wasn't aware of that committee, and it's not that it was a secret or anything. Once you start Googling it, you find, you get hits and there's stuff going on, but there was no central place to find any of this. And so once I knew the name of it, yes, then I could find it, because it's not buried. It's just not very easily discoverable. And so I was finding that kind of thing. So there was a number of times when I was saying, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. Oh, there's somebody already responsible for this. But then you start asking, well, are they doing it the way I would like to do it? Could I interact with them, or have they got a different angle on it, or things? But yeah, that was impenetrability of systems.
So beyond that, is there even there's where it is happening already, but people maybe within government departments don't more broadly know. But is there also where it's not happening?
Yeah.
People want to rely on maybe they rely on their own data and evidence, but they don't really like the idea of research evidence.
Yeah. And I mean, and that is one of the things. So even with Impact 2030 is this whole thing of data, sharing data better. And I've heard anecdotally about, say different departments not, sharing data. And I don't know why, if it's just that, getting data into a system that would be easy to share, or if it's that so if it's just a procedural, block, or if it's that they kind of perceive it to be their data or something, I'm not sure. I mean, that can happen in academia. People are like, that's my data, which isn't a helpful way of doing things. But I think, yeah, so there's various levels.
In our paper about brokerage events, that there's the higher ed bit, but then there's also the government department bit, and even with the best examples of forward-looking, outward-looking research units, they have to win over every policy area one at a time. And then does that mean that there's also something very fundamental about the initial induction and training and learning for the civil servants who are going to be involved in policy areas?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't know how that currently works, because I haven't experienced it. But it could be. I mean, so there was a nice example, though. So from one of the other people in Tefera said to me, because I was just generally talking to him about this, and he said it reminds me of when we started getting economists into the various departments. So first of all, so somebody had this idea that every department needs an economist, and they're like, what would we be doing with an economist? And now they can't imagine not having them. That like so many things go through the economic evaluation, and they really use that aspect very well and very thoroughly and routinely, which I think is, I would like to see the thinking about the data and the science becoming a routine part of developing policy. But that was, I thought, a nice example where it was just culturally not done. It wasn't how people behaved. They weren't used to this resource being there. So initially they weren't quite sure how it fitted in, and now I think probably couldn't imagine without it.
Yeah, the civil service established the economic service, if you like, arising from the downturn, the establishment of part of the expenditure. Obviously, Robert Watt drove that very, very strongly as the Secretary General there. And it's moved on. It's actually gone beyond the concept. There's some sociologists and stuff. And then in parallel, we've got the CSO and the data people. It's embedded. So the next, you're talking about the next.
It would be nice if it became like that. I suppose that's an aspiration.
Then the connecting bit, then between the two worlds, it's kind of one of the hardest bits, because we've talked about, for example, the concept of maybe a group of people here and a group of people here, maybe in the same university, maybe in different universities, working with the same people. But those people that they're working with, they don't want to be inundated by everybody either.
How do you manage that?
And it's particularly the role of evidence synthesis. I think there's a lot about, and we're beginning to find this in the research project that Mark is leading on, that evidence synthesis is a really big thing to help in. So it's not about research, a piece of research. It's about who can look at a number of pieces of research.
Yeah. And so what do you mean? So like, how do you find those people, identify them without overwhelming them, because then they become the clever, useful person who now everybody is, although that'd be a nice problem to have, but that everybody was banging down the door looking for more of this type of analysis. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it comes down to the various incentives and structures on both sides, so academics are like other people. There's career incentives and structures. And I think the problem of the people who are particularly good at it having like an overwhelming demand is not an easy one to solve, because if we do identify people who are especially good at this, they will have a lot of people wanting to work with them, and that would be a nice problem to have. But I then guess that it would be that kind of, we're talking about that kind of organic mutual decision of working together, and it would for most academics, it will come down to, what they think is actually an interesting problem where they can do something worthwhile. And so they'll probably then be making decisions, I would expect, based on what they think is the most impactful and interesting problem. But if we end up with that problem of there being too much demand, it'd be a nice problem to have, yeah.
In my career, I had a few phases where I worked usually with researchers, and we covered one of them at these seminars, the white paper in education in the early 90s, when we had researchers like Professor Seán Ó Foghlú like in rooms with us for like weeks to draft. Do you see that as a model for cooperation?
So kind of an embedding. I think that is a nice model. Yeah, I think. I think especially as I suppose the initial stages of a project or the initial stages of a new type of relationship, because it's very hard to really learn how the other person sees things or what their current status is just from conversations. Because like if we were chatting, you might think these are the 10 things I need to know, and you might presume I know these other 15 or 20 things, but they're not actually obvious or intuitive to someone who's not in the civil service, for example. So I think yeah, embedding is a very nice way of doing things. And
see, the research art and fellowships become some of that.
Yes, yeah.
There's more embedding going on now, or at least project people going in with some embedding into the civil service than there is coming the other way. There's really only 4 or 5 have come the other way, including myself.
And what do you think, so I'll ask you, I mean, so because that's what are the motivations and what are the hesitations on the side of the civil service? So they think that they'd be kind of adrift in an academic, it's less structured in lots of ways, right?
The opportunity, I think it's about creating the opportunities.
Yeah.
And then there's two, for me, and I'll stop answering questions. For me, there's 2 things. There's the idea of somebody working on the system. So I'm helping work on the systems to connect. I'm working with academics about what works on the system. It's not actually in a field, although we have tried some stuff in a couple of fields. We've written it up and so on, particularly on one on drug dealing and drug taking in the northeast inner city, where we got a group together. But typically it's more about what works. But then there's also an expert in a certain area from a policy department seconded out for a period of time. And there's just a couple of examples of that.
Yeah.
There's Sean Redmond in UL and Ian Hughes in UCC.
So does it impact in terms of is it in terms of career development and career progression in the civil service? Does it?
It's not even at a stage where it impacts because it's not really there.
Yeah.
So I think it's opening the concept as an opportunity.
Yeah.
The other one in my career, where obviously the role of science and trust in science featured really strongly. I was in charge of the Department of Education and Skills at the time was when COVID was underway. Have you any reflections really on I suppose, the trust in science that has arisen from that, because we were kind of in a different position. It was really interesting to see the relatives, especially to our nearest neighbours on either side, and the impact of evidence on what government decided to do.
I mean, I think it was so it was an awful time, but it was quite a positive example in terms of how people were, reacting to what was going on. In terms of, I mean, we had, very good acceptance of the need for the pretty awful restrictions. Nobody enjoyed any of the restrictions, but they accepted the need for them. And I think a lot of that, again, was to do with actually having open public conversations. I distinctly remember, Ronan Glynn with the whiteboard and doing the pictures and, spelling out what it means in terms of minimizing contacts and trying to, buy time basically for the other measures to come in, which we were actually so lucky in general that the vaccine was available quite so quickly.
People were positive about the vaccine on the whole.
I mean, our vaccine uptake was amazing. I mean, I was in queues. It was like being at a festival again or something like that, being in a queue in Lansdowne Road Stadium, waiting to get mine. And it was kind of funny as well because it was done by age. So I started meeting all these people I hadn't seen since primary school because, we were all in the same year of birth. But yeah, no, it was, and we were all waiting for our chance to get it. I think that was I think it was a really positive example, and it's hard to exactly put your finger on like what would be different between us and the UK. I mean, possibly the particular prime minister they had at the time was not an incredibly serious person, if we could put it like that, and especially didn't perhaps look to be taking things as seriously in general. And that possibly filtered down, although I don't know if that's possible to quantify.
Stakeholders that actually they really wanted to take the word of the scientists. Unless the scientists said something was the right thing. They were more uncertain. It's very interesting. That trust thing was just huge. And
I suppose we're very lucky, and that's a very privileged position for scientists to have and academics to have.
But given that that's the case, then the opportunity to build on that. And we can see, for example, in climate change, where there appears to be the same acceptance of what the scientists are saying, but there doesn't seem to be the same acceptance of actions.
Yes, and that's a very challenging one, right? And I'm sure Jenny probably has ideas on this as well. But a lot of that is all the recent flooding is a good example. So in that people are, you don't hear these people doubting climate change. But until the waters are arriving around your ankles, I think they can think of it as a slightly remote problem. And of course, the time to prevent a flood is before it happens. And so, it is harder to convince people of the need to do something to prevent an event they have never seen happen yet. So, you have parts of this country that were flooded in the last few weeks that hadn't experienced flooding before or hadn't experienced significant flooding. And if you were to talk about building flood defenses in those areas, they'd be like, what are you talking about? We haven't had this, but the science is telling us that this is an increasing risk. So it is, I think it's just harder. COVID was a very immediate thing, so you could see that people were getting sick, people were going into hospital, from one week to the next, from one day to the next, the numbers were increasing. Whereas climate change, it is a very interesting one in that it's the consequences of it are so much slower to arrive, it appears. I mean, so it's kind of like gradually then suddenly.
There's imbalance in, I suppose, the power of stakeholder voices at different times. Balance. And that at times of real crisis, and we've had a few, but COVID as an example, certain voices can come through louder. There isn't the actual crisis. It's very, and the political system has to decide.
I mean, it did happen during COVID as well, in the sense of, so there was that, when it was the Christmas 2020, wasn't it, when they decided to open bars and restaurants again, and then for the sake of opening for 2 weeks, they were closed for 6 months. So, and there was a strong voice from the hospitality industry, but they ended up actually suffering worse as well. So it wasn't like, even if you were protecting the hospitality industry, you wouldn't have opened at that period in time. But
anyway,
yeah.
have you just, I'm going to come to the end of the talk and then open it up, but of asking questions and then open it up. But have you any big aims that you have for the next couple of years that you wanted to mention? Like, what do you want to try and achieve? Have you major outcomes?
So I have a few broad things. So I think like climate change is one of the big things that like it's the biggest challenge we face. So that has to be, you know, in there in terms of how do we deal with that. But it's a very complex problem, as you know, like even it doesn't belong even in one government department, you know, so it's across so many different departments. But that is one that I want to start to address. I don't know if I can give a specific target there. But other things, I mean, so closer to, I suppose, my own background, academic background and knowledge would be, you know, just in terms of genetics and genomics and healthcare in Ireland is another one that I'm quite interested in. There is an opportunity there to have a kind of a slightly more preventative medicine mindset as well, because you have with genetics and genomics, you have an opportunity to understand risk factors before somebody gets ill. And that can help you target resources, maybe even give people, you know, a lot of it is kind of lifestyle advice. Most of the time, it's the same advice as you'd hear from anybody. You know, it's like, you know, get exercise, eat well, and all these kind of things. But you know, there are opportunities for preventative medicine there, which I think are very interesting. And that is a one to convince people on, because I think a lot of what's happening at the moment, and I mean, so health, as you know, is a very, very busy department, and you know, and they're essentially dealing with emergencies all the time, medical emergencies and structural emergencies, and to convince anybody to invest in something where the benefit is going to be later down the line, like, you know, start thinking about, you know, preventative medicine. It doesn't prevent tomorrow's things, it prevents them further down the line, which means there's a period of time when you have to do both. You have to be, you know, dealing with today's like deluge of emergencies and thinking about the future. But what we do know is the population is growing, medicine is getting more expensive all the time, and if we want to keep this as something that we can do well for our population, we need to try and minimize costs, not by reducing the level of care, but by trying to, you know, prevent as much as we can at the same time as doing as much as we can.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to open it up. So I'm going to open it up. Just kind of, if people are online, if you want to put in comments and questions, we'll try and get to them, but we don't want to stay for too long. I'm going to focus on the room first. So could I ask people to put their hands up if they want to come in, and could they say who they are and so on? I might take three and then go back out again. And
sure.
John might help. So we won't have a problem here. You can choose, John, who to go to.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aoife. Great discussion. Is it?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a microphone. It's a microphone for online.
Okay, great. So I'm Jenny Stevens, Professor of Climate Justice here at Maynooth, and I've studied kind of science policy interface my whole career. And one of the things, and you mentioned trust, but we're at a place where people don't trust the government, let alone trust science, right? Because so much, particularly with the issues like climate, academics are saying this is what we need to do, but the government isn't doing it, right? And so my question is about like that mistrust angle, not just on the science, but on the government. And that comes to another question, is it's like, what is your science advisor to who, and who's listening to you? You know, who, because we didn't talk in the discussion about the mechanism by which you advise, right? You talk more about engaging with researchers, but but who are you, what are the mechanisms by which you can contribute to policymaking, I guess is one of the, and then my final thing was just also about social science. And how are you integrating social science as well as just as a science? Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to take a few.
Yeah,
Try and remember them all.
thanks. My name's Ian. I'm a criminologist at Maynooth. Very similar questions, maybe slightly building on what Jenny asked there. One of which is also in relation to social science, but also in relation to social policy. Like, are you going to have a role in advising around the social policy side of things as well as that, which is maybe more related to natural sciences? And then also building on Jenny's other question, in terms of who are you advising? Like, what is the point at which your advice is being sought? Like, is your advice being sought at the policy agenda setting stage, or when options are being developed, or maybe at the point where there's a few options already developed? Like a bit more on the mechanism, I suppose, as well. Thanks.
Sure, we might come back, but there's a lot in those.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to remember it all. Yeah, so in terms of the trust, I think that is a challenge. I wasn't particularly framing it as trust, but maybe more as emphasis, because I think people do have trust. I don't feel there's mistrust, but I think there's maybe a difference in emphasis and maybe perception of urgency and importance is how I perceive it. You possibly perceive it differently, but things like there's lots of issues where I suppose there's various like, I'm trying not to get into too many particulars, but in terms of so there's the tensions between building and floodplains and things like that. So there's tensions between water quality and then what's happening in terms of farming. So these kind of tensions exist, and there's this weighing these things up, and the emphasis. I think that's a place where it's very challenging, and I think it's very difficult. Like when we see what's happened to Lough Neagh essentially turning green, and that's very obvious now, but it was predictable and predicted. Lough Derg is going the same way. Do we want to, how far do we want to let that go before we say we have to do something? And then unfortunately the remedies are also slow. So you can't just turn it back to pristine water in one day. And so then you have to convince people that actually this is a long-term project to correct this. So but I think I don't feel that I personally hadn't framed it as a trust thing, but I think an emphasis and urgency thing, but I suppose are linked. Then you asked about, and you both asked about, how and when the science advice is happening. So, well, in one respect, I'm still building that. So, and this is what I was told to expect when talking to the various international comparators and counterparts, that it wasn't like on day one when I arrived in, there was 20 people banging down my door going, finally you're here, we've been waiting for you, because people were carrying on doing their work, and they had their own ways of doing things. So I'm trying, it's a process of trying to get this integrated. So that is still in progress. And then about the social sciences, yes, I do. I read the word science broadly and including the social sciences. And so I don't have that personal expertise. So what I've done is in the forum, which we're going to be announcing soon, there are social scientists in that forum. So that's my way of tapping into that area. But I did mention I had a meeting with in the Department of Justice, and the person I spoke to in New Zealand was a clinical psychologist. So it's not quite social sciences, but a lot of what if you go to the webpage of the New Zealand science advisor to the Prime Minister, you'll see reports and papers written by him, and he talks of things like pathways into crime, for example, and child offender becoming youth offender, becoming adult offender, that we can see this. Why aren't we intervening earlier in the process and trying to, so I would consider that being in the social studies, social sciences areas of things, and there's various other ones as well, of course.
Hi, I'm Michael Mullins. I'm a Fulbright scholar visiting with Research Ireland, and my Fulbright project is to do comparative studies of the research landscape in Ireland versus other similar sized countries. And I've had the opportunity to talk to lots of people, lots of universities, and lots of stakeholders, which is kind of nice. A question I get, a response I get from a lot of people is that over the past 2 or 3 decades, the pendulum has swung pretty heavily from impact-driven research to curiosity-driven research and back and forth. And some of the extreme periods where research was almost entirely impact driven, there was some people talk about corporate capture of university research. What is the proper balance, and what would you advise the government to do?
Well, we might just go for one more. Alan here.
Yeah, hi.
Hold on, wait for the mic, if you can hear me online.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Ellen Hazelcorn. I now work in consultancy and policy areas. Yeah, so I just want to follow up exactly on that question because of the importance of fundamental research. Hard to sell with the big and the long line of, if you look across the research ecosystem and so on. So I'm curious as to how and to what extent you have a role in talking about an Irish research policy, which we don't have. Impact 2030 is not a research strategy. It's tasks, it's not a research strategy. And how you see that. So I was involved in the 2012 big thing that we did on national priorities. That's one extreme, and you can get that. It's in a certain political and economic point in time. But look where we are now and look at the wider set of questions. And I'm interested in how you think you can go about selling the importance of fundamental research.
Do you want to do those two? Okay. So I suppose I'll just say that I don't think the role of government science advisor is in that research policy space. There's other people working in that, but I do have views on this, so I'll share those. So with regard to the general, what you might call the curiosity, discovery-based research versus the one that's closer to some kind of implementation or impact or something like that. I think I would share the view that that it went too far at certain points. I think I witnessed certain colleagues who didn't manage to adapt to that necessarily, and then you end up losing expertise and things like that because they had really good skills, and then that ends up being lost to the Irish system, which was unfortunate. This is a balance, and it needs to be a balance because sometimes it's imagined a bit like a conveyor belt or a production line. You've got to be doing your production at all the various stages. You're putting the final touches on something for market, but you have to have something to get ready for market. And so that process starts here. And so what you would like is to have a mix of all of those things. I think in terms of selling it, the COVID vaccine is a really excellent example because people think the COVID vaccine took 6 months to produce. It took decades to produce. And the woman who did that work is amazing. Caroline Carrico, for people who don't know, she got the Nobel Prize in the end, but we gave her a prize in the genetics department in Trinity before she got the Nobel. So we were happy we got in early, but she came and she gave a public lecture as part of that, and it was extraordinary to listen to her. So she was working on basically a particular property of mRNAs. Previously, I would have had to tell people what an mRNA is. Now everybody's heard of mRNAs because of the vaccine. But essentially, there was this idea that they could be used therapeutically, but they were chemically unstable, so they couldn't be used. And so she was doing what looked like a very arcane project of trying to essentially stabilize these mRNAs. And she got demoted. She eventually got fired. It was I have to make it was like there was 2 universities in Pennsylvania. There's Penn State and University of Pennsylvania. She was Penn State. UPenn. So she was no longer employed there, but when all this attention came back, they put her on their website. They were delighted to say, "Oh, look, this she was from here." And so she worked really tirelessly, and I think that's an example of if you want to be able to do these things, you have to go back. You have to be in first principles. This was a very new type of vaccine, and the really powerful thing about it is that it can be updated and modified to other things, and one of the original, nobody was doing it for COVID because COVID didn't exist. Actually, some of the motivation was as a cancer therapeutic, and that's still something that it could be used for. So those things don't happen, by modifying chemotherapy. You don't get totally new cancer therapy by starting where you are. You have to go back to first principles, and I think that's an argument that can be made and is made over and over. But at the same time, then people want to see, you know, if we're investing all this money in it, something should come from it, and it does, because but it has to be that balance. Otherwise, otherwise we have nothing to actually, we wouldn't even have in Ireland something to do the commercialization step on. You know, we wouldn't have that opportunity because we hadn't got those things coming through. And was there something else you asked me as well? Was that it?
Well, it's a hard sell. I mean,
It's a hard sell.
It's a very hard sell when you're looking for results and you're looking at that. And I just wonder, did you have a role
Okay.
in that? It's not to say, look, I'm a social scientist, and I was going to ask that same question about, you know, that COVID committee was great, but it had no social scientists on it. And it was just completely limited. But yeah, I mean.
Okay, so maybe people online can't hear. So I'd say it was basically the idea that it's a hard sell. Yeah, no, that it's a hard sell trying to do this. It is and it isn't. At the same time, like sometimes we see, you know, people getting fascinated about, you know, like the Large Hadron Collider. People get fascinated about this. You couldn't have something that's more apparently distant from everyday life. You know, people are talking about subatomic particles that are so tiny and so imperceptible that we didn't even know they were there for so long. And, you know, they get discovered in these extraordinary conditions in a machine that it took 4 countries and, you know, decades to build. And but people get excited about these things. So I think people are interested in science. And maybe you know, and CERN is an interesting example as well, because they talk about how, pardon?
So the European Science, you know, the Southern Observatory, you know, that we're members of.
Okay, yeah, but one of the things about CERN that I was about to say was, you know, there's so many other things that came out of CERN that aren't the original, like let's say scientific goal. Like the original scientific goal is particle physics and understanding these tiny things that you can only detect with this machine of this size. But at the same time, they've made huge advances in, you know, fiber optics and computational power. They will lay claim to the internet and the World Wide Web, and, you know, all of these kind of things that have been industries then in and of themselves and enablers for other big industries. So I don't actually think it's such a hard sell once we start the conversation. That'd be my view. Maybe I'm just, I'm obviously completely biased on one side, thinking it's all cool.
I think so. Okay, anybody else in the room want to come in?
You didn't answer about the corporate capture.
So, I don't know about corporate capture. What's the question?
Local industry drives the research agenda through policy papers and things like that, to the extent that during the extreme periods of the pendulum swing, some of the faculty members I've talked to have discussed corporate capture of the university research system.
I don't think I really know what that means, so I can't answer about it.
Drives the research agenda.
Yeah.
Basic science or whatever.
I mean, so, well, I did say that I thought it went too far. I don't really know. I feel that sounds like a question, like a trap more than a question. Sorry, but I don't quite know how to answer that. Yeah.
Well, how far is too far?
Well, I think it needs to be a balance of both. So once it becomes skewed one way or the other, I don't think it's a good idea. My research is like discovery-based research, but I'm not going to advocate and say that should be the only kind going on in universities either. And I think it's really valuable that I want the impacts of science to eventually come out into society. I want things that get discovered in universities and in labs to actually help people improve society, or just, you know, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, and we enjoy it in that way. But that isn't my skill set necessarily. You know, I'm not the person who's going to set up a startup company. I don't have that type of, that's not the way I think. I get obsessed with these little problems and trying to figure them out and do the problem solving puzzling bit. So I appreciate that those other people are there, but if it was all like that, they'd have nothing to commercialize pretty soon, because all the good ideas would be done and then there'd be none coming along the way. And if everybody was like me, then the kind of things we do wouldn't be getting out into society. So I can't put a number on it, but if that's what you're looking for, I haven't.
I thought you were an advisor. I was wondering what advice you would offer to the other.
Okay, but I'm not an advisor in that space.
So she's not in charge of research policy.
Right.
She's in charge of, you know, of science advice. It's a different
line
division
Yeah.
within the department. further?
I did say that at the beginning. It's not my area, but I have opinions. Yeah, yeah.
So we're going to go to some, whether it's your own comment, Mark, actually.
Yeah, just a reflection on the comment and then some questions online. I would put it a different kind of way. I think we're in quite a healthy place in Ireland. Now, I know there's problems everywhere, but thinking of the United States at the moment, and so we're not captured. And I know colleagues over there just can't teach now climate change or critical race theory or things. So I think it's more about how we can defend the position that we're in and not slip into that kind of state and corporate capital capture of the universities. And I think it, in part, is an obligation on ourselves to have a fierce defense of truth, rigorous scientific truth, independently of who's funding and so on and so forth. And that's very difficult because you can't separate the funder from the knowledge that's produced. Power and knowledge are two sides of the same coin, but there is a fidelity to truth that I think we have lost that can be the bulwark against some of these pressures, these enormous pressures that are coming on academics. And we've not been good at defending truth. There's been a relativization of truth across continental philosophy in the last 40 or 50 years that I think is beginning to shift back to kind of more analytic philosophy, where I think some idea of the truthiness of truth starts to become accepted again. So perhaps we're in a good place. It's about defending, comparatively defending the space and window that we still have relative to other countries. Online, you've started all sorts of things. We've had a wonderful set of questions, but the Darwin Day now is caught on, and somebody in business wants to replicate the musical chairs.
Yeah.
800 students in business in the first year.
Yeah.
This is going. You've caused. There's going to be a war now.
Doing one chair at a time.
Yeah. Bum cheek would be a healthy competitive asset. So a lot of commendations, a lot of good questions, a lot of this is the way to go. Is a really important position, a really important role. Possibly two areas that some of the people online have been answering themselves. Talking to them, so is the use of AI to pull collective intelligence about ideal policy options. So all the ethics and all the morality that goes around that, at the same time as, and even if it's just to make it more accessible to policymakers, the stock of evidence that's available in Ireland. So how far is it ethical, or at all should we use AI to generate the kind of policy synthesis, even if it's overseen then by and triaged by a scholar who's in that field to generate speedy research evidence for policy. And the second thing is Mary Doyle has been asking, and I think this is where I think this seminar to me is hugely exciting, because this is a huge opportunity in an Irish context to place evidence at the heart of policy making in a way that we've had science advisors before, but there's a move on to bring universities into the picture. And I think you have been very good politically so far, because it's enormously difficult to generate those relationships and so on. But you're probably now at the stage of building and organising and capacity building. So Mary's asking, I suppose, about the structures, the scale of investment, the infrastructure, the systemic foundational pillars that might usefully put in place. And I suppose, are they better developed in the civil service than they are in universities? The Civil Service Research Network seems to be well ahead of IUA, who've dropped huge interest in this area. I don't think it's as vibrant as what it was a year and a half ago. It's still important, but it's not as vibrant. And each individual university's incentive structures really haven't shifted to reward this kind of
And recognise,
this kind of work. So maybe think a little bit about the systemic institutional capacity building. As you move into the building and organising phase, investment phase, some thoughts on what we need to do to build out the fundamental infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things in there, but so in terms of in the incentives inside academia, I mean, I touched on it very lightly earlier, but yeah, so most people, their career incentives, they want to do the things that help them get promoted and things like that often. Like there's a mix, right? Because most people in academia are also very, very motivated by the subject they study and with a deep interest as well. So the two things come together. But I think, yes, it needs to be properly recognized in the universities. There's lots of things that make any organization work well, and universities are the same in this respect, that are not properly recognized. Like, so there's lots of things where a really good colleague is, talking to other people, encouraging them, ask, like sometimes just on the corridor saying, how are things going? The time spent with students, where you end up having conversations with students about what they might do later, or what do they do with their summer, and all these things. These things don't get recorded or noticed anywhere, but if nobody was doing them, the place would be it would be so much more fragmented and not working. So I think we do need to be better at recognizing the things that people do that are important to actually us all working well together and the organization functioning well. And this is another aspect of it. It's that outward part. So not only the things that are happening within the corridor of your own building, or the students who come to you there, but also this outward part. And we do need a better way of recognizing that. I think sometimes I feel like often what happens in academic research, it gets overly metric driven. So this idea of things you can count. So suddenly things you can count become the only things that matter. And some of these things are just not that countable. And therefore people don't know. And so they said, well, we can't count, have you counted how many times you have met with the, civil servants? Maybe one project comes out of 20 or 30 meetings. And have you therefore been wasting your time, or was it part of a process? And so I think, yeah, the metrics thing is a mess, and I don't like it. But I think that engagement with policy and all of these have to be better recognized. At the moment, impact is often measured in terms of things like patents and IP and that kind of thing, whereas other kinds of engagement aren't going to be leading to patents and that. So we don't have those kind of numbers. But yeah, I think there's a need for repositioning those kind of things, so that there are better rewards and recognition of the really valuable work people do. On what you said at the beginning, and I've probably lost the middle thing you said, but in terms of what's happening in the US, which is very frightening, especially because I think a few years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, I would have believed it was impossible. That I was quite stunned how quickly things changed under the new president. That only, I think it was March last year, so he'd been elected in November, inaugurated in January, and in March the universities were feeling under threat. There was like lawsuits, there was firings, and they weren't allowed to hire the staff they wanted to hire. They had to hire other people. I hadn't thought that could happen, especially not that fast. You kind of think that these structures are more robust, and it turns out they were discretionary. And the US, that had been leading in terms of academia and research for most of the 20th century, then I kind of feel if it can happen there, it can really happen anywhere. So there's no room for complacency. And yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's just finally, Seán, I think, there's always been class wars on campus over the ownership of the production of knowledge. So who is investing in the production, who asks the questions, so on. But it's the culture wars now that are now layered on top of the class wars that I think are causing internationally, even in Britain, I think huge stresses and strains on the research for policy nexus and trust between academics and so on. I don't think we're there yet. Now, that's very I wouldn't want to underestimate the severity and significance of the challenge we've got, but science advisors' roles are plumped straight in the middle of a titanic campus set of wars going on internationally. Unfortunately, I think we've got some space to navigate because I don't think it's as fierce or draconian or authoritarian, but it's not neutral neither.
No.
So it's figuring out how we can make sure we don't become the kind of authoritarian governance of universities that I think is happening in many other countries.
Right. That was a closing remark from Mark, as we often have at these seminars. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Look, this has been really great, and we really appreciate you've been here, Aoife.
Thank you.
Appreciate everybody being here online and in person, but it's great that Aoife was here. So a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have a great communicative style, and I think that's shown through, and hopefully it's shown through to people online. And you're very coming into the role open about how you do it and keeping your mind open about how you do it to see what works is really great, and we look forward to
Hopefully, yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.